This is Michael Osterlink, and I'm talking to Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer from the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. Good afternoon, Tony.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Certainly. So we've been working together for quite a while on multiple different issues, but more recently we've worked together on a working group, mostly for center-right purposes, conservatives and libertarians, putting together a top priority list for the next Congress, 2013, and the next administration, for measures that relate to transparency and accountability. One of the measures is in supporting whistleblowers.
Right.
Now, that's something you and I have actually worked together on since about 2006, I believe.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about your personal experience briefly as being a whistleblower,
Right.
and then why it's so important that we protect whistleblowers in general and national security whistleblowers in particular?
Many whistleblowers, I think it may be ironic, end up being whistleblowers without intending to do so. I think many folks actually do work in government who have great ethical orientations relating to what's right or wrong. And so many times individuals who have concerns are simply trying to do the right thing, trying to point out a deficiency, a failure, or in some cases a criminal act. And this is where there's a complete disconnect, almost a deficit of guidance, which will help a whistleblower do the right thing. And in many instances, in some ways, I didn't even know I was a whistleblower until I was in the middle of preparing testimony. I mean, that's how clueless I was. And one of the questions that was presented to me was, do you understand you're about to be a whistleblower? It's like, no. And they said, well, we have to tell you this because there's nothing to protect you as a national security whistleblower. So you're kind of on your own. And that was a big wake-up call for two reasons. Again, I never thought of myself as a whistleblower. I was just trying to tell the story about how some things had gone very wrong in pre-9/11 intelligence. And secondly, and more importantly, just to fix the system. Not to create the havoc and chaos which ensued, but simply to say there's things we can do better, and we should do better based on the fact we all took an oath of office, and it's our obligation to protect the American people, simply put. It's our job then as advocates at this point in time, years later as you point out, to actually create as best we can guidelines and, frankly, protections for individuals who have critical information relating to failures of government process, procedures, or criminal actions, and give them the ability to come forward without fear of reprisal, which inevitably happens, continues to happen to this very day.
You know, it's amazing for me to learn when I first started doing this stuff, especially around national security whistleblowers in 2006, that you're in DIA or CIA or other intelligence agencies, cannot go up your own chain of command
Right.
to quote-unquote blow the whistle, can't go to the IG to blow the whistle, and can't go to Congress to blow the whistle without being retaliated against.
And to add to that point, it is beyond simply not being able to actually report a failure or corruption or crime. You become the issue.
Right.
The IG report, which is publicly available on the internet, is actually a very unique report by Judicial Watch's own review. Judicial Watch I've worked with, they reviewed it, and by their own admission has said that this report is unique by the fact that the majority of the report is out to slander and diminish my credibility rather than resolve the issue. And that's extraordinary from an IG. So my experience has been, especially certain IGs are totally corrupt. We're talking about mafia-level corruption here. We're talking about the Goodfellas type corruption, short of the baseball bats, and that's how bad it really is. I mean, short of physically beating you to death, they will do everything short of that. And this again is something we have to look at: is this system which incentivizes corruption in our best interest as a people, and frankly, are the board of directors of our country, Congress, doing everything they can to ensure that they have full accounting for everything that goes on within the executive branch.
Well, what's interesting and kind of disturbing about Congress is that it seems to me that these are common sense reforms. I can't imagine anyone without common sense arguing against them, and yet we hear repeatedly that the Intelligence Committee staff push against these reforms.
And this is why there's negative incentive in two ways for whistleblowers. First off, as you mentioned, the committees. The committees themselves are manned by staff which come out of the very community they oversee. There's no incentive for these folks to do the hard oversight of a community organization they have to go back to. So they've got to break that. They've got to find a way to basically break this revolving door between the people who have to oversee the intelligence agency and the intelligence agency they have to go back to. Because if you go back and you've done something to upset your leadership, you will then become persona non grata. Secondly, and more importantly, I think you have to have an independent IG infrastructure. IGs, for the most part, report directly back to the organizational head they belong to. For example, DOJ, the IG reports to Eric Holder. Do you really believe the IG who is beholden to Eric Holder is going to do anything or say anything against him? It's insane. We have to find a way to basically establish oversight of the IGs directly to Congress, to make them separately operating outside the agencies they're overseeing. Not to say they can't sit within that agency, but the people who they report to has to be congressional.
Well, we know that there are legislative fixes to reform this problem and process, and that the next president can actually implement changes at the agency level to make changes, including changing the culture to actually support people blowing the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse. What do you think is the likelihood that the next president and the next Congress will take these reforms seriously and implement them?
Let me answer that in two parts. First, cultural changes will take generations. We have layers upon layers of bad management who have learned bad habits and how to suppress any sort of whistleblowing. They have learned how to use and abuse the system to their advantage. That's the sad fact. So the way you change that is by, frankly, target them, try to figure out who they are, and then marginalize them. You're not going to be able to fire them, put them somewhere they cannot be in charge, and replace them with people who have the concerns of our nation at heart and will do the hard thing. Secondly, any political group of appointees are always worried about political survival. That's the long and short of it. However, it is up to those individuals to actually try to balance the retention of power with what's best for the American people. And again, I think in many ways that comes from experience in dealing with the areas of expertise. That is to say, if you're overseeing the Navy, it's good that you've served in the Navy and understand what men and women below you go through. The problem has been in many administrations, to include this one, academics with no earthly clue of what they're overseeing are appointed to positions of authority, and then go about doing what they do based on opinion, feelings, and academic theories, which really have no relation to the real world. So this is where I think politically, those who are in charge are obligated to pick people who are qualified to oversee, not just politically anointed by the powers that be to be in those offices.
Amen. From your lips to God's ears. We shall see what happens, at least with the next administration, along those lines. Amongst the transparency measures that we are organizing around and supporting for the new Congress and the next administration, besides whistleblower protections, is also an audit of the Department of Defense.
Yes.
And I know that's something you support. Can you talk about your support of an audit? What do you expect it to find, and why it's so important?
Well, let me hit really quick what I expect it to find. That you'll find wholesale violations of the Anti-Deficiencies Act. Congress appropriates money for specific purposes. And one of the things I've actually talked to several organizations about is the fact that in two instances you have two-year funds and you have end-of-year funds, which become essentially piggy banks for those who wish to do things which may not be appropriate or authorized by Congress. It's these slush funds which become essentially a form of manipulation or hijinks, which actually result often in bad things happening. So I think that's one of the first things you'll find is the money which was appropriated by Congress within a certain statute, legal code, was not used for that legal code or purpose. And I think that's what a lot of people are sweating bullets about right now. Beyond that, you're going to find a lot of waste. And I think this is the other thing they don't want to have people looking at. Organizations like DARPA often fund to the tune of billions of dollars science and technology which goes absolutely nowhere. And oh, by the way, so often is the case that technology is being developed in the private sector for a much lower price. Yet we don't want to look at that. We want to go off on our own. So I think the efficiencies and the economy of force, which one would hope is being looked at and maintained by leaders in Pentagon, is probably not there. So it's a double whammy of bad news for them. And that's exactly why they're standing up so strongly right now to say you can't audit this. Frankly, this should be a wake-up call to Congress to say it's time we get a handle on all of this. Send in people who are not only qualified, but willing to do the hard work of trying to track the money down, figure out where it went, and frankly, hold people accountable.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.